On-the-scene coverage of ACC 2015 is supported by Effient.
I'm Peter Block for On the Scene here in San Diego for ACC 2015. With me is Marco Valgamigli from the Netherlands, and this is a little bit sort of like a wrap-up. We have a 2-for-1 on this interview. Marco has done 2 trials, both called the Matrix trial, Matrix Access, and then a second Matrix trial, which is bivalirudin versus unfractionated heparin in acute coronary syndromes. So, Marco, let me just begin with the radial versus femoral access business and whether or not there really is a difference. There have been a lot of trials looking at this. Your trial finally shows some outcome.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Actually, this is the biggest study ever performed on that matter. We recruited 8,404 patients with ACS across the board, STEMI, non-STEMI, who were supposed to undergoing an invasive management, and they were allocated to radial versus femoral access site. We had 2 primary endpoints. One was MACE, death, MI, stroke. The other one was NACE, meaning the combination of MACE, death, MI, stroke, plus major bleeding. Formally speaking, both primary endpoints are actually positive in the sense that both have a p-value which is lower than 5%. But since we have 2 co-primary endpoints, we set the alpha value of 2.5. So for MACE, we did not get there. So the p-value is 0.003, so formally above the 2.5. So formally the interpretation is that MACE did not differ, but for the MACE, the p-value is very small, much lower than 2.5%, and so the statement is that radial is reducing NACE as compared to femoral artery.
And so when I look at these data, I looked at all of the other endpoints, everything moves in the same direction.
Well, actually, for us it's the case, because we have actually seen a difference in mortality. MI did not formally differ, but the number were favoring the radial approach. There was no difference. Stroke was very rare, no difference, 0.2% in both study groups. And of course the bleeding were clearly favoring the radial approach.
Okay, so enough with the femoral versus radial approach. I guess radial wins as far as bleeding is concerned. That really pushes it. So tell me now about the second trial. This is unfractionated heparin and bivalirudin in acute coronary syndromes. Tell me what you did.
So we formally re-randomized patients after having been randomized to radial versus femoral to receive or not to receive bivalirudin monotherapy versus what you may think to be a contemporary good control group, which is UFH plus GPI at discretion of the interventional cardiologist. At the end of the study, 26% of patients got GPI in the control group, 4.6% of patients in the bival group. So I think these are numbers which are very well representative of the overall practice. We had again 2 primary endpoints. One is MACE, the other one is NACE. Unfortunately, in this case, both were negative. So for both of them, we could not reject the null hypothesis.
What about the combination?
Well, interestingly, we have seen a huge benefit in mortality, and huge means even greater than what we saw with radial. And also there was a clear benefit in bleeding, which also included fatal bleeding complication favoring bivalirudin. For the MI rate, actually the incidence was identical, 8.5%, and the stroke rate was very low and basically overlapping.
How do you think that works? Why is mortality so impressive?
That's a great question, and I think the explanation for that is coming from the bleeding signal. Unlike for the radial, we have seen a difference in fatal bleeding events favoring bivalirudin. So if you want to put the 2 things together, I think we can. Radial approach is reducing access site bleeding complication, but of course does not do anything with respect to non-access site bleeding events, and that's where bivalirudin comes into play. Non-access site bleeding events are, 1, more frequent, second, prognostically speaking, a little bit more impactful, and that's probably the reason why by reducing them with bivalirudin, you are decreasing mortality.
So there are 2 trials that sort of come together to give you one great outcome, and that is that bleeding is probably not so good for you. We know that, and if you use bival, that's a good thing, and radial beats the femoral once again as far as that's concerned. Thank you so much, Marco.
Thank you, Peter.